Episode 41 of Stand Up welcomes John Avlon of CNN to give us his take on the Senate trial of the impeachment of our president, whose name is Donald Trump. Then, for something much different, I welcome the head of oceans at Greenpeace UK and author of How to Give Up Plastic, a guide to changing the world one plastic bottle at a time. Hey everybody, welcome to the classroom of life that is Stand Up with Pete Dominick. I'm your host, where every show I try to do my best to fight apathy and ignorance and learn together from expert guests and interesting people about the issues and ideas that matter to you, your family, your community, country, planet, your own personal well-being, trying to help figure out how to navigate this crazy idea, this crazy journey that we are on together. Thank you very much for joining me here on the podcast. Tell your friends to check out the Stand Up with Pete Dominick podcast. Spread the word, proselytize about this here show. Really appreciate all of your support on Patreon with your paid subscriptions, patreon.com/Pete Dominick. Lots I want to talk with you about here at the top of the show. A few things I want to play for you. Also, I asked my friend Cornell to call in. He's an old listener and regular caller of Stand Up with Pete Dominick on SiriusXM. Let's go to the phones to talk to Cornell from Texas. Cornell, you're on the air. Hey, Cornell.
Hey, what's going on, man?
I like to treat it like it's a live show and people are calling in just to get ready to ramp up for that possibility someday. I'm so happy that you could join me for the top of the show.
Absolutely. I'm absolutely pumped to be able to do this.
Check him out on Twitter, by the way, at RenaissanceXM, and he's got an organization called civicsolve.org. What is that, pal?
It's actually it's a civic empowerment consulting firm, and effectively what we do is we help communities, nonprofits, even for-profits who want to work with communities to come together and do everything they can to solve their own issues. And if they aren't able to do it themselves, to get as far as they can, and then from that actually reach out to other agencies or maybe officials to get them over their hump. Because in my experience, when you've got issues going on, a lot of times people will just go to an elected official and say, hey, you've got to do this. You've got to make this better. And the elected official, even the best elected officials, are saying, hey, I've got 100 things and yours is the 101. It's going to take a while to get to this. But if you come to an elected official with a plan, with a group of invested people who are already wanting to be a part of this situation being better, then the elected official is going to be a lot more likely to be able to help you and even have this issue be solved because they're not having to do all the lifting themselves.
Yeah, that makes sense.
They've got a group, that's ready to go and get it done. I
love it. How's it working?
We actually we worked with the school district, Austin Independent School District, just last year. I don't know if you've heard, but in
Austin, Texas. Yeah,
Austin, Texas. The Austin Independent School District is going through some real things, and one of the things they're having to deal with is school closings. And so they have been doing a lot of different outreach with the community at large, trying to figure out how they do this, what steps they're going to do as far as bringing students together in different schools, what kind of programs they need to try to continue, which programs maybe they want to create. And so they actually brought us on, along with some other people, to lead facilitation groups with members of the community to really look at and figure out what are going to be some of the best ways that they can, really weather what's going to be a pretty difficult time for the district because of tax revenue and a bunch of things that are, making it so they're going to have to close down some of their schools.
Wow. Well, good for you, man. I'm happy to have you joining me at the top of the show. I wanted to go through a couple of audio clips for something a little different, just to have fun, play a few things, get your reaction to them. First of all, Cornell,
yes.
What do you think of Andrew Yang? Any hard opinions either way?
I do have a hard opinion, and it's actually a similar opinion that I have to Bernie, who I actually voted for in the primary in 2016. But my opinion of Andrew Yang is that I really do love that he's talking about the universal basic income. I mean, I was a fan of that when I first heard about him being connected to that. The big issue for me is that he, in some ways, very much like Bernie, seems to believe that all of our greatest issues of the country can be dealt with income inequality. And unfortunately, as a black man in this country, I know that there are plenty of people of color who have all kinds of money, who are not suffering in the issue of income inequality, who still have institutions that make their lives harder, that keep them out of opportunity. So income inequality and giving people, a certain amount of money every month will definitely solve some issues, but it will not address institutions, which some of whom in their very nature have real issues of racism. And so I feel like that whole suggestion and that offering of, hey, universal basic income is going to lift all boats. Sure, it will lift a bunch of boats, but there are a number of boats, most of them with black people in them, that have anchors that will not be lifted by that universal, basic income, because those issues are beyond class and are beyond income.
Your metaphor of boats is making me uncomfortable. But I get it. All right. Well, speaking of black guys, here is Dave Chappelle. He was with Andrew Yang in South Carolina campaigning and also making phone calls to voters. It's a pretty funny clip. It's from CBS News reporter. And I want to get your take on the other side. Here is Chappelle while campaigning and working the phone banks for Andrew Yang in South Carolina.
My daughter is 10. Trump is her first white president. She thinks the whites are doing a terrible job.
She thinks the whites are doing a terrible job. It's interesting because the same for my daughters, Cornell. I mean, this is their first, technically, my younger's first white president. It's so weird to think that. But.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because when you think about that, especially now that there are a number of people who their first president was Obama, so they don't know, oh, wait, this is a weird thing. They see Obama like, okay, this is how our presidents act. And then they see Trump, they're like, what the hell is this?
Yeah, it's like they don't know any better. They see the president and they think he's a black guy when they're in like first, second grade. And then they put out that that picture of all the presidents for the first time. Like, wait, one of these things just doesn't belong. What the hell? All right, here's more Chappelle from CBS News campaigning for Andrew Yang.
She also understands that anyone can do their job as long as they're an American and a patriot and committed. So we're just trying to get the right guy in there. That's how I feel. My name is Dave Chappelle. I'm a world famous comedian.
So he's on the phone now. He's working the phone bank. He's saying, my name is. All right.
Today I'm just rolling some phone calls and trying to garner support. We got a big primary coming up, so I hope you get out there and let's rock the vote.
What are you hoping to bring to the team as a surrogate?
Inspiration. The best thing any candidate can ever do for his constituency is inspire them. Yang inspired me, and I hope to inspire his supporters to, stand firm and be strong. No matter how unlikely people say things are, I'm a product of unlikely success and unlikely circumstance. So I try to stay positive and optimistic and just support the things that I really believe in. Thank you for your support.
Now he goes back to the phone call. He says thank you to support, and this last part is pretty funny.
For me and for Yang, yes indeed. All right, we'll take it.
Did you hear that?
I didn't.
He said he's talking to a potential voter for Wang. He said, thank you for your support for me and for Andrew Yang. Okay, Wu-Tang. Wu-Tang to some voter. Anyway, there he goes. Dave Chappelle. Weird that Chappelle is supporting Andrew Yang. But
when I first saw that, I was just like, what? And it's, I mean, I kind of get it. And I know I kind of get it because, again, like what he's talking about is really appealing. And it's appealing because, like, okay, yeah, let's just give people money, because if they don't have to worry about, how can I pay rent or how can I do these other things, then who knows what can be unlocked? Who knows what things people can do? So I get that. At the same time, like, it's funny, he was actually just talking about, he was saying, I think one of the greatest things that candidates can do is inspire people. And I hear that. And at the same time, like, when I hear that, I'm just like, we keep falling into this, I want to be inspired. And I do too. Like, I love inspiration. I try to inspire others and all that. And inspiration last through a campaign, but it doesn't make legislation happen. And that's where lives are changed.
That's a good point. That's a good point, Cornell. All right, let me play another clip for you. This one was pretty outrageous today. Went pretty viral. This is on, what is it, Fox Business. Maria Bartiromo had the Commerce Secretary, Wilbur Ross, who looks exactly like that Jeff Dunham puppet character.
Oh, my God,
he's like
doesn't he? Yeah.
800 years old, and he caused quite a controversy from this 1 minute. Here we go.
You could seriously see the Chinese economy come to a halt. And given the large percentage of global growth that China commands, does that actually threaten what you're just saying?
Well, first of all, every American's heart has to go out to the victims of the coronavirus. So I don't want to talk about a victory lap over a very unfortunate, very malignant disease. But the fact is, it does give businesses yet another thing to consider when they go through their review of their supply chain. And top of all the other things, because you had SARS, you have the African swine virus there, now you have this. It's another risk factor that people need to take into account. So I think it will help to accelerate the return of jobs to North America, some to U.S., probably some to Mexico as well.
Oh, that's a good point, actually.
Yeah, it's a great point, Maria Bartiromo. Cornell, the Commerce Secretary, says coronavirus could help bring jobs back to the U.S.
Nothing. I mean, it used to be that nothing like a good war, spurred the economy. Apparently, nothing like a good pandemic, is going to spur the economy. Like, forget wars. Wars are old. We need pandemics now that are going to.
Sounded like he might have. He might have. Did you hear him? Let me see if I can find it. Is it right here? There it is. Thinking he might not be feeling so well.
Yeah.
Yet another.
Oh.
Yet another.
Right. Yeah. For somebody that is as old as he is, he probably needs to not be wishing or even kind of appreciating the sickness of others, because, he's one cold from, maybe being in a real bad way.
I thought he was in his early 80s. I just looked it up. Wilbur Ross, our Commerce Secretary, 117. I had no idea he was that old.
I mean, he's a miracle of modern medicine, apparently.
We love Jason Johnson. He was he's regularly on MSNBC, and I like this moment today. I want to get your reaction to, Cornell, which is when Chuck Todd on MSNBC basically tries to say, give him a both sides, and here is the great Jason Johnson having none of that.
Jason. You heard Dick Durbin basically say it's probably going to be the same pattern today. Missed opportunity?
I don't think so, because it depends on what your perspective is. The Republicans are asking questions either to protect their electoral futures or to appease the President of the United States. The Democrats are asking the questions to demonstrate to their voters that they're the only ones who actually care about how this process goes. But I think in the grander scheme of things, the missed opportunity here is this. We have to stop pretending that these are two equal sides seeking the truth. You have one party which has basically capitulated any of their sovereign responsibility to protecting this president, regardless of what the facts are. And you have another party that is simultaneously trying to get at the truth and maintain some semblance of government. We cannot treat the Republican Party as if they are going into this process the same way. And that's the biggest missed opportunity, that all of these senators are not realizing that their legacies and the future of sovereignty in this country is on the line.
So, Cornell, so often the cable news networks, especially MSNBC and CNN, try so hard to look like they are balanced. But of course, if they were being honest, they would have to say there aren't two sides to climate change. There aren't two sides even to this impeachment. And they bend over backwards trying to present the Republican side of things. But in this case, Jason Johnson not having any of it. How about you?
I love Jason Johnson so much, as far as just what he, like, day to day, every time he's on, he's keeping it real. And by real, I mean, he's not afraid to say things that he believes to be true that may not necessarily please the people that he's talking to. If he's like, hey, you need to hear this. And yeah, I'm so over the both sides-ism, because it's not genuine. It completely makes a mockery of the reality of what's going on. And it leads people to think some of the really just backwards things that they do about, oh no, everybody does it. I mean, it's one of the reasons why we have so many people who just absolutely crap on politics and on on being involved because oh well, it's all the game. Everybody's out to get what they want for themselves, and it's all corrupt. It's like, no, it's not all corrupt. Not everybody is doing really shitty things. There are some people that are, and there are some people maybe on both sides, but there's one side over here that's doing a whole lot. And just because one person over here on one side is doing it, and there's 80 people over here, that doesn't make both sides equally at fault. It's like, no, that's not how it works. And unfortunately, because we've got media that know it's a business, so they're trying to make sure that they kind of tell the truth while not pissing off enough people that they don't watch them and they don't get their ad revenue. That's it's a business decision. It's not a decision about actually portraying the truth and shedding light on things people need to know. It's about talking about enough stuff that people care to check in, but won't actually leave. And it's ridiculous. And as a former journalist, I absolutely hate everything about it.
Cornell, good stuff. Now, finally, I wanted to have you on to talk about the Pete Buttigieg tweet from last night that I was I commented about it, pretty annoyed by it. I said to you earlier, I said, maybe it's not that big a deal. And you said, no, I think actually it is. So let's talk about it. Last night, Pete Buttigieg, yesterday afternoon, he tweeted, in the face of unprecedented challenges, we need a president whose vision was shaped by the American heartland rather than the ineffective Washington politics we've come to know and respect. And it was greeted with quite a negative reaction. Andy Richter of Conan O'Brien wrote, this is a dog whistle, right? Ava DuVernay was outraged by it. She said, respectfully, where is the American heartland located exactly in your mind as you write this tweet? Does it include Compton and other places like it? Because us folks from those places would like a president shaped by our vision too. Serious question, would love an answer. My tweet about it got some negative reaction too. I was kind of surprised, but I just said, I don't want to speak for black folks, but for those who see this tweet, those black people who see this tweet, let me know what the heartland conjures. And so I needed some black up, so I wanted you to comment on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a lazy term, and it's kind of ironic that people look at Pete Buttigieg and he's so sharp. I mean, the guy speaks he speaks he can speak Norwegian and he does all these things, and he's so intelligent. In fact, people have compared him in some ways in his acuity to Obama. And then he uses a lazy term like the heartland, which the heartland is considered like Iowa, Indiana, Illinois, although not generally Chicago. It talked about a certain region, and I know an issue that I have with it, along with just kind of being lazy, because you don't really have to really articulate what you actually mean by heartland, leading to Ava DuVernay's question, what is a heartland? But it also speaks about a part of the country that you don't generally associate black people with. It doesn't mean black people don't live there or people of color don't live there, because they do. But, when you see the Iowa caucuses, you don't see media talking to black people. You see them talking to white folks. When you've got media talking to voters in the quote unquote heartland, more often than not, they're white people. And it makes it so that, oh, well, the heartland is white. Well, no, there are people of color there. You just don't hear from them. And so then the values of the heartland are values that only reflect one part of the quote unquote heartland. And more often than not, that part of the heartland is not colorful. Yeah. It also goes along with, I feel like words like that, it's like real Americans. Like when people talk about real Americans, I've never used the phrase real Americans. And if I did, I would be thinking of people who make, under a certain amount of money, with, the vast majority of Americans who are middle or even upper class, much less lower income folks would be real Americans. And the people who are multimillionaires, can't relate. And there's only, a handful of them. They have all the money. But I still don't feel like I would use that phrase, because it just it screams of whiteness, of a certain time. Real America.
Real Americans, Make America Great Again, the Heartland. I mean, what people hear when they hear those things, you should know better than to use that kind of terminology if you're trying to be inclusive to all Americans.
Well, and far too often, people using that term, like I said, it's lazy. It's one that it resonates with some people, and those are the people that they're trying to resonate with. And like I said before, those people don't often tend to be black. They tend to be, the kind of elusive, kind of a unicorn of the working white class, quote unquote. And so the heartland, it conjures, a simpler place with simpler values and all those things, which generally means, values that are, kind of straightforward and are very limited and do not consider the experience of people that don't look like it. And and like I said, more often than not, that is not people of color, and it certainly isn't black folks. So those who are really at all politically aware hear that, and they know, okay, you're not talking about black folks. You're talking about simple, down home, salt of the earth white folks, and it's
salt
like
of the earth.
I mean, like,
real
that's
salty,
great. right? Like, and that's fine, but don't act like that's not what you're doing. And a lot of times, if somebody pushes back on that, then it's like, oh no, that's not what I meant. It's like, well, whether you meant to mean it, that is actually what you meant.
It's how it gets heard, and you got it. Yeah, you got to know how things are heard and interpreted. And lastly, I would just argue, I like the phrase, the term working people. I think of working people as like middle class, union or union related type, black, white, Hispanic, maybe not with a college education. They work. They work for wages, maybe as opposed to salaries. Maybe they do manual labor. People who are actually working. Like, I actually use that sometimes. I think that doesn't have a color connotation, and I think it describes the vast majority of hardworking Americans, working people. What do you hear when you hear that one?
Well, when I hear working class, I actually think it's far too limited of a term, especially in the economy that we live in now, the quote unquote gig economy, and the economy where there's plenty of jobs, but those jobs together, maybe 2 or 3 of those jobs together, make what used to be, you used to have people. Michelle Obama's dad, I think he was a janitor. He was some kind of like fairly, low level employee in the school. And from that, he was able to get his daughter to law school and support a family. And, he didn't have some big, brilliant job, but from that, basic job, he was able to do, pretty, what we would now say are amazing things that now people with 2 or 3 jobs can't accomplish. And so, I think working class, when I think of working class, I think of people who have, now several part-time jobs, or in one way, shape, or form have to work to be able to live. They do not have the ability to just, I don't feel like working, and that's okay, I'll be fine. They have to work for a living. And if they don't, they're not going to live. And so I think in the economy we're in now, that includes a lot more people than, say, maybe it used to. And so that's why I think the idea of working class needs to actually be a lot broader than I think, the person that hears that would typically think.
Wow, all good points, buddy. I'm glad I got you on the phone tonight. I like this. Good way to start the show, man. Thank you for joining me here at the top.
Thanks so much, man. I'm glad.
All right, buddy.
That
is Cornell. Can I say your last name?
Absolutely. Woolridge.
And follow him on Twitter at Renaissance XM, and check out Civic Solve also on Twitter at Civic Solve, civicsolve.org. He's a great guy doing great things. Been a great friend to me through this transition. I appreciate you hanging out, man, at the top of the show. Thank you, Cornell.
Thanks for having me, man. I'll talk to you later.
Okay, let's get to my second guest. You want to count Cornell? I was pretending like he was a caller, like it was a live show, because he used to call a live show. That was fun to go through some of those clips with him. But I asked John Avlon to join me because I wanted to talk impeachment with him. The Senate trial, of course, happening. John is an anchor at CNN. He is an author. He's written a whole bunch of books. He's a former editor-in-chief of the Daily Beast. He does their reality check. Check him out on Twitter at John Avlon. I asked him where we should start on impeachment. Here's my conversation with the always brilliant and very articulate John Avlon.
Yeah, look, I think you need to start with impeachment and the argument, the pivot point we're at, which is twofold. One, the question of whether the Senate will vote to have witnesses. And keeping in mind that every Senate impeachment trial in American history has had witnesses. And the argument for witnesses is made so much more powerful by the news that came out Sunday night that John Bolton, highly respected conservative, former national security advisor, who conservatives praised when he was, appointed, now he's being denounced as a turncoat and a, shill for the Democrats, which is totally absurd. In his book, writes that Donald Trump told him directly that he was withholding military aid from the Ukraine until they announced an investigation against Joe Biden. That's the direct witness. That's the smoking gun. That's as big as it gets. He was not, the White House blocked him from testifying to the House. The lawyer was going through the courts on behalf of Charlie Kupferman, his colleague. And now he's ready, willing, and able to testify with a book coming out March 17th that attests that the president told him directly what is at the heart of this impeachment. And the Republicans don't want to confront that uncomfortable fact. And so they're trying to block witnesses. They need to cobble together 4. Right now, there appear to be 3. And the question really is Lamar Alexander. Lamar Alexander, retiring senator from Tennessee, both an ally of Mitch McConnell and an institutionalist. It all hangs on him, because if they don't vote for witnesses, that Mitch McConnell will push this through, go through a vote up or down to acquit or convict. 2/3 bar has always been ridiculously high. We've never had a president removed from office, nor do I think anyone should wish for a president to be removed. But what is essential is that the record be clear. What's essential is that we don't run away from facts for partisan purposes. And that's what we're debating right now. It's a very dangerous movement over and above the argument being advanced by Trump's lawyers, particularly Alan Dershowitz, which is that the party of so-called lowercase r Republican values and small government is advancing an argument and defending a president by saying that he is absolutely unaccountable to law and impeachment. And that is the most dangerous thing I've heard as an adult.
I want to get to Dershowitz in a second and expand a little bit about that. But going back to John Bolton, not only do we have the book, and Trump can effectively dismiss it and say it's hearsay. He said that. He never said that to me. And his advisors could say, I never heard anything from John Bolton. But then this week we heard from Congressman Eliot Engel, a Democrat from near where I live in New York, saying John Bolton told me about this, told me he was very concerned about what the president was doing. And so the reaction yesterday on social media was, well, there was a lot of whistleblowers, but it seems like John Bolton was one of them. So now it's corroboration of a crime. Forget about what John Bolton is saying in the book. Now Eliot Engel is saying he talked to me. How big is that?
Okay, I got a couple questions about that detail. One, why didn't Eliot Engel mention it before? 2,
yeah, why didn't he?
That's a really good question. I'd love to know. 2, I don't know. Maybe I'm naive, but it seems like Eliot Engel would not typically be the kind of guy who John Bolton would be confiding in. Look, I am the world's biggest cheerleader and hoper for bipartisan friendships, and it's possible the two bonded over certain policy issues, but that's certainly an unexpected odd couple. I think it just comes down to the fact that the book's going to be released. It's due to be released by Simon & Schuster on March 17th. The White House is trying to shut it down. At the same time, trying to give balance to Mitch McConnell's argument inside the conference. And check out how lazy and cynical this is. That if they call witnesses, it'll take too long. It's the hassle factor argument. That, and it's incredibly persuasive by senators. Like, this drags on. It's so boring. It's not going to hit 67. If you think that's not a persuasive argument because you, like me, have an idealistic vision of the responsibility and honor of being the U.S. Senate, unfortunately, that's a massively persuasive argument combined with the Senate Majority Leader's power. So despite the fact it contradicts everything they allegedly ever believed in, that's the jump ball right now. It's absolutely insane because when the information came out, the Senate was blindsided. McConnell was blindsided. By the end of the day, the Bolton information. Yeah. By the end of the day, they were starting to rally around a new defense. It's not really new information. We all knew the president lied. We all knew he announced this investigation for political purposes. So we don't really need to hear the witnesses. Let's just vote. We're going to acquit him. How breathtakingly cynical is that?
Well, it's cynical, but as you said earlier, it's also very dangerous. Dershowitz's argument, you said, is dangerous, but what is even more dangerous, arguably, is that if you have, 34 Republicans willing to protect the president, then what you also have is a dictator. I mean, to not have a check in Congress.
I just wrote a column that I filed, hasn't been published yet, called what I'm planning to call the King Trump defense.
Is all your stuff generally at CNN.com nowadays? Yeah.
No, I have certain exceptions for really long essays, but in general, like everything I write gets published at CNN.
So what's wrong with the authoritarian dictator argument?
Well, it's that we do exist in a constitutional republic. And while the arguments being advanced by the president's lawyers would effectively remove constraints on his power, and just I'll walk you through this. Dictator is a very, is a strong statement, and it's incompatible with democracy. And even if you have people arguing for totally self-interested and partisan purposes that the president should be basically unchecked, that doesn't mean America turns into a dictatorship, and it would be totally misleading and sensationalist and fear-mongering to say that. That said, follow the logic that's being argued because it's establishing a precedent. And let's go back to Nixon, because what Dershowitz argued essentially is that Nixon, and John Dean agrees with this, Nixon would not have been liable, right? He was abuse of power, and he was doing what he thought was in the nation's interest in the context of his election. And that's what Dershowitz argued. He's not only argued that abuse of power is not an impeachable offense. Dershowitz is arguing that whatever a president does to secure his reelection, if he believes his reelection is the national interest, it cannot be unconstitutional. Now, every president believes their reelection is in the national interest. The whole point is you have to have a check on self-interest to keep people focused on the national interest. They're threatening to blow that away. Okay, make it real for me. How come that's a problem? Going back to Nixon, at the time, his lawyers argued somewhat apologetically to an appeals court. They said that the president has asked me to tell you that he believes he has the same power as Louis XVI, except in 4-year terms. The president of the United States asked his lawyer to argue that. The Supreme Court knocked it down 9-0, bye-bye. Now, earlier, last year now, Trump's lawyer argued in an appeals court that the president literally could fall through on his campaign line and shoot someone on Fifth Avenue, and he would not be liable for charges or criminal prosecution until after he left the White House. The president of the United States lawyers literally argued that he could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and get away with it until he left office. At the same time, the Office of Legal Counsel offered the opinion, which Bob Mueller, I think, too naively stuck to, saying that a president is not, in fact, indictable for any crimes committed in office, and the only check on a president is impeachment.
Right.
Now the president's lawyers are arguing that check doesn't apply either.
Right.
That's an incredibly dangerous fact pattern they're arguing. That's a precedent that is the exact opposite of what every Republican allegedly believes about small government, republic not an empire, everything we heard during the Obama era. They're selling it out quick and fast for something that is so dangerously antithetical to our Constitution. And by the way, it's a totally bogus argument.
Which one?
Nobody believes it but Dershowitz.
That if the president does it,
yeah, the president does it's not legal. You have to commit a crime in order to be impeached. That's all utter bogusness.
Well,
and I mean, even Jonathan Turley, who has flip flopped all over the place between Clinton impeachment and now, and is usually cited by Republicans, is like, no, man, that's nuts.
Here is Ezra Klein at Vox, who you've been retweeting as well. But he says, here's the ugly truth at the core of all of this. The president actually can do whatever he wants, rob, cheat, steal, murder, if he can hold 34 Senate votes. Maybe I was a little extreme to call him a dictator, but that's the point. And it's the point that you just made. You can do whatever you want as long as you have the support, in this case, of this many senators in the Republican Party.
That's the danger. That's the danger we're confronting right now.
The other thing I certainly want to ask you.
Right now, on our watch, in real time. The next 48 hours will determine how all this goes down.
The other thing I want to talk to you about is just quickly, your reality check. Your reality checks are so great over at CNN. Follow John on Twitter if you're not watching CNN, at John Avlon. But this one is about, history. This one from, I think, today when we're talking, Thursday. Go check it out. In terms of foreign interference and why the founding fathers thought it was bad, why any country would be concerned about foreign interference, by the way. It's not the most original precedent, but it's worth reminding people. I'm glad you did that fact check on it. Give us a historical lesson.
That's a re-up of one I did
months
ago.
Oh, good.
Yeah,
well, fine. It needs to be repeated over and over.
Yeah. I mean, look, and the reason I can speak about this stuff with, a degree of confidence is because I wrote a whole book on Washington's farewell address, and this was one of the core key things he worried about. He went on about it at great length. So did the other founding fathers. It's not ambiguous. They were terrified. They were deeply afraid, and I've talked about my book, Washington's Farewell, a bunch, about large forces that, based on their understanding of history, could destroy the Democratic Republic. Hyperpartisanship was one of them, and that's one of the reasons why that's always been a core concern and fight of mine. But one of the other ones was foreign influence in our elections, in our domestic politics. Literally, one of Trump's lawyers yesterday argued that's okay. I mean, it is so contrary to what the founding fathers wanted and warned us against. It's being offered up in an apologetic tone because people are afraid of this president. They come up with an incredible number of rationalizations for why they should abandon what were their principles to defend it. And it's all based on fear and greed. All based on fear and greed. And it's totally ahistorical, and it's completely contrary to what the founding fathers watched. So pick your choice. I sometimes say this is not and should not be a Republican versus Democrat debate. This is Trump versus the truth.
Right.
And folks are deciding what side of that they're going to be on. Well, here I'll make it even clearer. You can choose Alan Dershowitz or George Washington. Take your pick. If you have to think about it for 3 seconds, try again.
Was George Washington hanging out with Jeffrey Epstein? Of his time? Who was the Jeffrey Epstein of George Washington's time?
You got me there, pal. I got nothing for you.
Well, I didn't know how to respond. I mean, who's going to pick Dershowitz over Washington? I had to come up with something. Okay.
Sure, there's some jackass out there.
And lastly, I wanted to ask you about what happened between a reporter over at NPR and the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo. You're, of course, a journalist. You ran the Daily Beast. You hired journalists. You're the editor-in-chief there. You care a lot about journalism. And so you're always making great points, important points. You're one of the most credible people to talk about this. How do you read what happened there? In case people don't know, Mary Louise Kelly from NPR sat down with Mike Pompeo. Yeah. Basically, I'm going to just say he didn't like the questions she was asking and went after her. And it's gotten pretty ugly. It kicked off the NPR reporter, another NPR reporter that covered him.
So petty, so false. I discussed it on Reliable Sources this weekend. Look, among other things, this is the downstream impact of the Fox effect. The Trump administration folks have gotten so used to softball interviews from Fox News that when they sit down and have a real interview where people ask real questions to hold them to account, they don't know how to deal with it. It ruffles their feathers. It unnerves them. These were not tough or unfair questions in particular. And Mike Pompeo, because tone comes from the top, his first impulse is just to sort of lie and try to discard them. Now, I've been very clear. I've stood by everyone in the State Department 100%. Well, what about Marie Yovanovitch? What have you done to stand by her? When the president was calling for her to be removed and she was being surveilled by people in the Ukraine, the answer, of course, is nothing, but he can't say that. So he just goes for bland platitudes and try to blow past the arguments. Well, that's not what journalism is about. And if folks are used to softballs, that they're offended. And then he made up a lie. He berated her in private and cursed at her. And then in his email, accused her of being unhinged. Listen to the interview. I encourage you. She's the opposite of unhinged. She is cool, calm, and collected in the face of a powerful person trying to totally lie to her and gaslight her. And then he says in a throwaway line at the end of the letter, and for the record, Bangladesh is not Ukraine. Notably not saying that she said it was Ukraine. She, by the way, has a master's in foreign affairs and has covered foreign policy, and he apparently brought out a map and asked her to pick Ukraine out of it, and she did, and he got angry and threw it away. It's the same thing as me saying, well, Pete, Rockland County is not the same thing as Romania. Implying that, you said it was. Nobody said it was, pal.
Well, yeah.
It's just high degrees of levels of disingenuous hostility to the free press and open inquiry. And that comes from the top.
And the really important
should be a why.
The really important point that you didn't make, the only thing I would add to it is there's certainly an undercurrent within this State Department, within this federal government, that if the Secretary of State doesn't have your back, if he's willing to throw you under the bus for this president and not defend you, that's a huge problem, and it creates a lot of fear from the people in the State Department. Where does Mike Pompeo's legacy stand in the fact that he allowed his own people to be screwed over like that? I guess Rex Tillerson wasn't having that, which is one reason why he left.
Yeah, although, Tillerson kind of gutted the department in many respects as well.
Good point. Look, I didn't mean to stand up for Rex Tillerson.
Garrett Graff wrote a big piece about Pompeo in the press. And in particular, he appears that Graff alleges to have a pattern of sort of denigrating and bullying female reporters. So, I refer you to Garrett's article.
Interesting.
But there is a hostility to accountability. There's a hostility to the free press. That amounts to a discomfort with democracy, and no one should be comfortable with that.
Oh, a great place to end it. You're so good at talking. John Avlon. I never need to edit my John Avlon conversations. So eloquent.
Be well, my friend.
Thank you.
Awesome to talk to you as always.
All right, buddy.
Okay.
Again, the great John Avlon. Watch him on CNN every morning, 3 hours every morning on New Day. He fills in as an anchor. He does their reality check. Get all of his books as well, and let him know and everybody know that you heard them here. Pop him a tweet or an email and let him know you heard him on the Stand Up with Pete Dominick podcast. Always encourages them to come on back. All right, you know that I am very anti-single-use plastic, and now for something different, I wanted to get Will McCallum on the show. I interviewed him when I was at SiriusXM. He wrote a great book called How to Give Up Plastic, a guide to changing the world one plastic bottle at a time. He is the head of oceans at Greenpeace UK, and I had a conversation with him about all the different ways and ideas that we could all use, implement, and support to get rid of single-use plastic, which is a campaign and a journey I've been on for a few years now. Here's my conversation with Will McCallum. Every year, more than 360 million tons of plastic are produced, and 13.9 million tons wind up in the ocean. One plastic bottle can take 450 years to decompose, and we are not going to recycle our way out of this one. Plastic pollution poses one of the greatest threats to the health of our oceans, and we're producing more of it than ever. Joining me now to tell us how to get it done, get rid of plastic, give up plastic, is an expert who's been at the heart of the anti-plastics movement since way before it became cool and popular. He is the head of oceans at Greenpeace UK and the author of a great book called How to Give Up Plastic, a guide to changing the world one plastic bottle at the time. He tweets at Art of Activism, so give him a follow there. Will McCallum, thank you very much for talking to me today.
Hi, nice to be here.
So I read the statistic the other day that the main plastic in the ocean comes from fishermen and plastic nets. It's not straws. It's not consumer plastic. How should we understand specifically the plastic in the ocean and where the vast majority of it comes from? How do we look at that?
Well, the truth is it's really hard to tell exactly where the plastic is coming from. So everything that you see out there is a bit of a guess. But roughly, we think that 50% by weight could be coming from fishing waste. It's really hard to tell exactly how much plastic is in the ocean. It's really hard to tell exactly where it's coming from. But what we do know is that a huge amount is coming by fishing waste. We think in the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, which is one of the biggest areas of plastic in the ocean, about 50% of the plastic there could be fishing waste. But across the ocean, we also see, the most commonly found items are things like plastic bottles, bottle caps, straws, plastic bags. These are the items that we're using on a daily basis. And then we have this whole other subsection of plastic called microplastics. So plastic that's too hard to see with the naked eye, but is there. And we think about a third of the plastic in the ocean could actually be these tiny little microplastics. And they might start out their life as a plastic bag that then breaks down into small bits of plastic, or they might enter the ocean as microplastics. So they could be microbeads from face washes or sun cream that get flushed down the drain. Well, they could be synthetic fibers on our clothing, like nylon or polyester clothing. When we put it in the washing machine, when we do our laundry, they shed off and they end up going down the drain and ending up in the ocean.
Okay, so the other big question is the idea of our individual behavior versus the policies at local, state, here in the U.S., federal level. You've been active on this issue and in this fight for a long time. Your book has a lot of great recommendations. We'll get into some of them, and I'll suggest them after I let you go here as well. But how do you see having the most impact? Is it government policy or is it individual behavior? Is it a mix of both?
It's definitely a mix. You know, this is a shared problem. We have a shared responsibility to address it. But when we look at the figures, when we look at 360 million tons, as you said, of plastic being produced every single year, without government policy, without big corporate policy, we're not going to get the change we need. Individual behavior is good, it's useful, it definitely helps, but the burden of responsibility is definitely much more weighted towards policy, both at government and a corporate level. If they don't start setting targets to dramatically reduce the amount of plastic being produced, we're not going to get to a situation where our oceans are clean and healthy.
People don't think about this, but there are real special interests that are fighting against government policies to get rid of any single-use plastics. It's generally the plastic manufacturers. Lay out who is trying to fight against these types of policies and what we can do to stop them.
So I guess we have all the companies that we know. You know, companies like Coca-Cola, like PepsiCo, like Danone, you know, these big, fast-moving consumer goods companies. And their whole business model is based around having many, many individual items of plastic that have their brand or their logo all over it. So they're very resistant to changing. But I really feel like they're at a bit of a crossroads at the moment. You know, they can see that customers do not want to be taking home as much plastic as they are food every time they go to the store. So they're one of the players. The other player that's you know, much less visible, but is definitely there, is the fossil fuel industry. So this is the Exxon, the Shell, the BP, you know, the big oil companies. And the reason they're interested is because, you know, they've watched countries from across the world start to make decisions about reducing fossil fuel emissions, which means they've got access to a load of oil they might not be able to burn in the future. So they're looking at where else they can use this oil, and they're seeing plastics as a possible way. So they're very invested in plastic production, and they're much harder to reveal and expose and talk about because the link is not as obvious.
Let me just say it a different way. There is still plenty of oil in the ground, which means there's still plenty of money to be made off of that oil. Most people think of oil being turned into gas or being used for some type of fuel, some type of energy. But as activists protest against that, and as we come up with new ways to heat our homes and cool our homes and power our automobiles, etc., using renewable energy, the oil industry has to find new ways to profit off of that oil. And one of the big ways, because petroleum is the main ingredient in plastic, is to keep selling plastic. Did I get it right?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Okay, so we've got to be aware of both those things. What about the difference between kind of the developing or underdeveloped countries and the more first world countries? Are we doing a better job than them? I see some of these terribly under-resourced areas and underdeveloped countries filled with plastic trash, and I do see some of those countries also making laws against it. Who does better? Is that even a good question?
It's a great question to help expose the myth that this is a problem over there in Southeast Asia and East Asia, because a lot of the time countries in that part of the world get the blame for plastic in the ocean, and that's, you know, frankly, it's unfair because a lot of the plastic that's ending up in those countries is actually coming from us. So my team last year went to Malaysia. We decided we'd take a look at what the problem was like over there. And we were finding plastic from the UK, from Germany, from Spain, since there have been reports of plastic from the US, because at the start of last year, China said that they will not take any more of our plastic, which means we've been shipping it to loads of different countries all over the world, and we're clogging up their waste systems. So the plastic problem, yes, is very bad over there, but we are partly to blame for that with our plastic over here. Also, the companies, so Unilever, as an example, or Nestle, these big companies, their headquarters, they're in the US, they're in the UK, they're in Western Europe, and they are the companies who are producing all of the plastic over on that side of the world.
All right, let's get to some of the suggestions that you write about in your book. And everybody should get this book, and you should buy a bunch of these books and share them with your friends, because there's so many great tips in Will McCallum's book, How to Give Up Plastic, A Guide to Changing the World, one plastic bottle at a time. I can't get into all of it because we only have a few minutes here, but you have chapters about giving up plastic in the bathroom, bedroom, kitchen, on the go, nursery, workplace, your community. What is a top line thing that can reduce our plastic, do you think, the most, our individual use?
Well, I can talk from my personal experience. The thing that made the biggest difference for me was just being a little bit more prepared with my lunch. So if you start to make your lunch on a Sunday to take into work every week, or instead of getting it on the go, actually going and sitting somewhere, that's one of the big ways you can reduce plastic as an individual, is being that bit more organized with your food. So make a shopping list, put some time aside to make some food and take it in. In the UK, I don't know about in the US, but in the UK, we use 11 billion items of single-use plastic every single year just through lunch on the go. Which is a mad amount of plastic just for something that we can quite easily cut out. So that if I had to make one suggestion based on my personal experience, that's the thing that had the biggest impact for me. But what I'd say with all of the suggestions, no matter which one you're doing, the most important thing with all of them that links them all together is that you talk about it, is that you publicize it, is that you tell your friends why you're doing it, is that you tell the companies that you're no longer buying from why you're no longer buying their product, because that's what's going to create the change, is by having more and more of a buzz about reducing plastic. That's what lets companies know, that's what let politicians know that when they pass that legislation, they create this policy to reduce plastic, they've got us on their side.
Pack a lunch, work in your lunchbox. If you're going to eat at lunch cafes or restaurants, don't use single-use cutlery or cups you suggest. You also just mentioned publicize the ugliness of this plastic. You suggest using social media to post pictures of unnecessary plastic packaging. Make sure you tag the shop you saw it in your photo and ask them publicly online why they insist on using so much plastic. And Will, we're here at the beginning of January, where people make these resolutions, and you argue that one thing we can all do is quit smoking. What does cigarette smoking have to do with plastic?
So every year, this organization called Ocean Conservancy do a big audit of all the plastic that they find on beaches and all the plastic that is observed at sea. And consistently, every single year, cigarette butts are in the top 3 items. So cigarette butts, they're made of a plastic material. They break down into microplastics, and they are everywhere. I mean, I've seen them on beaches that have possibly never had another human step onto that beach, and I found a cigarette butt on them. Once they're in the ocean, they can be taken by the ocean currents, and they could end up, in the frozen ice of the Arctic or in the deepest ocean trench. Cigarette butts, they're so small, they look so innocent, but if you needed an extra excuse to give up smoking, then, think about the ocean and use that as your motivation. You
went on a mission, you went on a trip to Antarctica, is that right?
That's right, yeah.
What did you learn and see there? That must have been amazing.
It was incredible. I'm lucky enough to be going back there in about 4 weeks' time to carry on with the mission. But when we were down there, we went to a place called the Weddell Sea. It's the coldest sea on the planet. It's so cold the fish, they have a natural antifreeze in their blood, and it is far. It's really far away. I remember being up on the bridge talking to the captain about how he was navigating through the ice, and we looked on the radar. We looked at the satellite system. We could see that in this 2 million square kilometer sea at the bottom of the world, there was us and one other ship. And whilst we were down there, we were testing for microplastics. We were trying to find evidence of how the environment was being impacted by humans. We found microplastics in 90% of the water samples that we took. We found plastics in freshly fallen snow, so they're being rained down as microplastics from the cloud cover. But I think the most shocking was we came across this iceberg, and if you ever get the chance to go down to Antarctica, you'll see the scale of ice down there is something else. This iceberg was 4 times the size of our ship, looked like a cathedral. And we came around the side of it, and there in the water, in the middle of this remote place, the most remote place I've ever been, possibly that it's possible to go on Earth. And there in the water were 3 brightly colored plastic fishing buoys. And it was really sobering to see that kind of human impact down there in that pristine landscape.
Let's go from Antarctica to the bathroom. What do we need to know about plastics in the bathroom?
Well, at the moment, for most people, plastics are everywhere in the bathroom. You find them, cosmetic tubes, you find shampoo, soap, it's all in plastic containings. You might have microplastics inside them, so tiny little plastic beads that are used in a lot of scrubs. You also have plastic cotton earbuds. You have toilet paper wrapped in plastic. So what I've done in my book is to break down different recommendations for each and every one of these products. And it's a great room to get started in because, it's actually quite easy to find replacements for a lot of these things. As I said, when you find that replacement, make sure you write to the company that you used to buy from and say, I've changed my habit. You guys didn't improve your packaging, so I've moved. And that is what's going to make the difference.
I got together with a few guys that I meet up with about once a month, trying to make male adult friends, Will, at 44. And one of the ideas, we try to come up with an idea, something to do in our community. And we talked about recycling and we talked about sustainability a little bit. But you have a chapter in your book about what you can do in your local community. How do you get ahead of it? What are some ideas that you and some friends could get together and work on to give up plastic in your local community?
I think there are 2 main ways there. And for me, this is the exciting bit of the book because it's about people working together. It's about talking about the problem and then coming up with solutions together. So your area, where the hotspots of plastic are. But there are two main areas I'd suggest. The first is go and talk to some of the local businesses. Maybe some of the friends you're making own some of those local businesses or work in those local businesses. Talk to them about, do they really need plastic coffee stirrers in the cafe? Do they really need a water dispenser with plastic cups in the office, and actually starting to have those conversations, because so often plastic has entered into our life without thinking. No one made a deliberate choice to start creating more plastic pollution, but it's just ended up there. We made the habit, and that habit is actually quite easy to break when you talk to one of the business owners or someone that works there. So do a bit of an audit of your community. Where are the places using unnecessary single-use plastic? And go and talk to them. And then the other one is, if you're a community that's active, if you know each other with your neighbors, you probably have gatherings. Maybe you have a Christmas concert, or maybe you have a barbecue in the summer. Why not make a pledge to make that event plastic free? Put up some signs at the event, get people to agree to a washing up rota beforehand, work out where you're going to source all of the non-plastic stuff from. So whether that's decorations or whether it's crockery or whatever it is, and then make a bit of a campaign out of it. Educate people about why you've gone plastic free and also how you did it.
I'm sorry, I don't think we know or use the word crockery here in the U.S.
Right. Paper plates, plastic knives and forks, that kind of thing.
Hashtag break free from plastic. You should use that in social media when talking about this. Will McCallum's book, go get it, How to Give Up Plastic, A Guide to Changing the World One Plastic Bottle at a Time. Kind of jealous. I kind of wish I had your job. Outside of plastic, you work in the oceans. Can you give us kind of a summary of the health of the oceans right now? I fear it's not going to be good.
It's quite challenging on the ocean at the moment. We have plastic is obviously the thing that loads of people are talking about, and that's great that people are talking about it and they want to get active on it. But we also have problems like overfishing. So 90% of fish in the ocean are being fished at the maximum possible level or being overfished. And that's quite scary because we have a population that's growing and we can't be fishing out all of these species at the level that we are. Then we also have, mining and other forms of pollution. And unfortunately, again, this is all against the backdrop of climate change. And what climate change does is it multiplies these other threats and makes them bigger. So an extreme weather weather event, a big storm or a marine heat wave or a coral bleaching, what that could do is a fish species that's already being overfished suddenly becomes that bit more vulnerable because of climate change. And it could lead to a bit of a cliff edge where, one year they just don't make it. I saw off the east coast of the States around Maine, the scallop fishermen are having a hard time at the moment. They're not finding the scallops there that they depend on for their winter money. And a lot of that is because climate change is adding to these existing threats. But there is a lot of hope as well at the moment. People are talking about ocean conservation like never before. And, we have some very good science on how to resolve these issues. If we put a third of the world's oceans off limits to humans, so 30% of the world's oceans with no fishing, no mining, then actually a lot of these ecosystems would recover quite quickly. A lot of places like coral reefs, like mangroves, like seagrass meadows, all of these amazing underwater habitats, they actually rebound quite quickly when we leave them alone. And that gives me a lot of hope for the next couple of years.
Well, that is a good point to end on, hope. Will McCallum, thank you so much. He tweets at Art of Activism, and he's at Greenpeace UK. Go get his book. It's so great. I've got a couple of copies. You should get yours. How to Give Up Plastic, a guide to changing the world one plastic bottle at a time. Will, thanks for helping us be the change that we want to see in the world. Thank you for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, Will McCallum, follow him on Twitter as well and let him know that you heard him here on Stand Up. His Twitter handle, by the way, is at Art of Activism. And get that book. Get a whole bunch of those books and give them out to your friends and community leaders, and we can all do a lot to kill and end single-use plastic. And finally today, a fourth guest. I wanted to check in once again with our friend at the University of New England. She's an immunologist. I can't say it. She's a doctor, and she's an expert on viruses and how they spread. We wanted to get an update on what is happening in China, more than what we're just hearing from the Commerce Secretary, who's psyched about it because it's going to bring business back to and jobs back to America. Oof. Anyway, here is an update from Dr. Meghan May, University of New England. You can find her on Twitter as well at Dr. May 5. And it's time to get another update. I've been following you and your tweets. Hopefully everybody is. Dr. May 5. Follow her now. She's constantly got the updates from the University of New England, where she is a researcher. Meghan, thank you very much again for joining me here late on Thursday night so we can give an update to folks on Friday. What do we need to know?
Okay, so there was a pretty big development today and another couple of pieces of information that have been kicking around. The big official development today is the World Health Organization finally declared something called a public health emergency of international concern, or a PHEIC. They didn't ask the marketing guys what would sound good for what to call that, clearly, but big giant mouthful. But anyway, what that declaration means is that nation states around the world are legally obligated to respond to this. In other words, to impose public health measures if they're affected. So this is something that a bunch of us were very curious about not happening last week when the WHO had an emergency committee meeting. They decided against this. It was a decision that was puzzling at the time, but they've since made it now. When you have several people in the hundreds outside of the original country where an outbreak started, that's usually a pretty good indicator that, there's international concern and impact. So that's one thing that's happened.
The New York Times reporting as of Thursday night at 9:09, number of deaths in China reaches 213, while confirmed infections near 10,000. My understanding is there haven't been any deaths outside of China. Is that right?
That is absolutely correct. I checked it 9 seconds before talking to you.
Okay.
And that's actually one of the things. So I'm gonna swing my pendulum from where I was a week or so ago, and that's actually one of the reasons why I'm starting to feel slightly calmer about this.
Oh, good. Good.
I know, not my usual move, but essentially what we're seeing now, there are 129 confirmed cases outside of mainland China, and there have been 0 deaths, as you point out. So if this were a disease that had an extremely high mortality rate, an extremely high death rate, which there was a little bit of concern about because the information coming out of China was so hazy at first, we almost certainly would have seen some deaths outside of China, and we haven't. So that's making me feel slightly calmer about everything. Once you have an instance where you have cases in places where you absolutely know that deaths would be reported, and you're not seeing that, that's promising. That being said, we have our first human-to-human transmission in the United States announced as of today.
What does that mean?
So that means...
I mean, obviously I understand that,
right. So why does it matter, in other words?
Why does it matter is what I wanted to ask you. Damn it. Yes.
So it matters for a couple of reasons. And I think this has actually a lot to do with why the World Health Organization officially made that declaration today. It matters because if you think about all the questions and all the screenings that have been surrounding this, the airport screenings, for instance, that we talked about the other day, they were focused on people traveling back from China, and questions that that physicians, healthcare workers are being told to ask patients are, have you been traveling in China? This human-to-human transmission in other countries matters because a person can now officially have contracted this virus while being able to answer no to those questions about travel to China. So it makes the contact tracing, the ability to follow people who've been infected to make sure they aren't spreading the disease, it makes it more complicated because it's not quite so simple as, have you been to China in the past 14 days? And if the answer is no, then you move on. So that's why this matters. And in the United States, the local human-to-human transmission that we saw, this was actually the new patient is the spouse of the patient in Chicago. So this is someone who had been taking care of the woman who was sick, and so it's not super surprising that she was this new patient, her husband, was exposed to her while she was extremely ill, and he then contracted the disease. That being said, there's also a paper that came out today, which is a little bit a little bit more concerning, where we officially had the first transmission from one infected person to another, but that first infected person was asymptomatic. So remember the last time we talked about how...
Right, yeah, and that's such a huge issue. If they're asymptomatic...
You have no ability to guess that you should really be masking yourself and scrubbing your hands and, Purelling the daylights out of everything. So we had talked about this being an issue that had emerged. So there's official confirmation. It was published in the New England Journal of Medicine today that this 2 patients in Germany contracted this disease from a colleague of theirs who was visiting from China, and she did not develop symptoms and get sick until she was already on her way home.
Which begs the question. A friend of mine's son was studying in China, and all of the American students were sent home. And so, what about all of these Americans that are now coming home that have been living, working, studying in China? I mean, aren't they potentially bringing the virus home with them?
Potentially, and so each of those students is.
They have to live in a bubble for the first 2 weeks. Is that the deal? Big plastic bubble?
They can play trivia with Costanza as, things go by to pass the time. So essentially, so anyone who's returning back is being urged to isolate themselves. And in fact, there are some facilities that are being made available for people to stay in for 14 days to try to prevent transmission. Australia has actually taken that measure officially, where they have anyone who's returning back, any Australian citizens returning from China have to stay on a place called Christmas Island for 14 days before they're allowed back to mainland Australia. And so it's a measure to try to prevent additional introductions. And so this is the kind of thing that WHO declaring a PHEIC, that does not roll off my tongue well. Wow. But the
or
World
anybody's.
Health,
Yeah,
exactly. Wrong letters in the wrong order. No just style to that one at all. But this is one of the factors where the WHO declaring a PHIEC, there we go. This is mandating that countries have to do measures like this. They have to follow patients who've come back from infected areas. They have to keep track of everyone they've had contact with and monitor them to make sure they don't develop symptoms. And if they do, they have to put them in isolation until they get better.
I gotta ask you, as we talk about the coronavirus, Dr. May, you just have to wonder, why we aren't talking more about the flu. I saw an article in the LA Times today titled "Wuhan Coronavirus Isn't a Threat to the United States. Flu is."
Absolutely.
How much? Yeah. So we've been making a big deal of this because it's a new virus and what's going on in China. But how do you look at the annual influenza and the strain that's out there now? I mean, I read, what was it, a couple of years ago, the flu killed 80,000 Americans.
Absolutely
we're so terrified of all of the wrong things. What do you have to say about the good old flu?
I have nothing good to say about the good old flu other than the respect one would give for a worthy adversary, if you will. It's an incredibly underappreciated health threat. And yes, I agree completely. The fact that
I got letters home from both my daughter's high school and my other daughter's middle school saying, the flu is here and giving you all the directives. So, what's your perspective on what we could do better to take better care of ourselves?
Well,
prevent.
The good news is, and one of the reasons why several U.S. health officials tend to say coronavirus and flu in the same sentence is that, excluding getting a flu shot, the measures that will prevent you from contracting and spreading flu are the exact same measures that are going to help you from spreading and contracting coronavirus, right? So if you're sick, you need to stay home and stay away from people. If you're coughing and unwell in a waiting room, you need to have a mask on your face. And they usually have them right up by the registration desk. You need to wash your hands when you're touching a whole bunch of things in public, like the handrails on the train or the doorknobs, the door handles, everything. It sounds fussy, but it's incredibly important, actually. So that being said, I think there's an element of familiarity that goes along with flu, and one of the best analogies I think that we can think of, even though the two topics don't seem related, would be to think about something like gun violence, right? So as Americans, we've almost gotten used to hearing about gun violence, either deaths or injuries or suicides or what have you.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
And so, but if you actually looked at those numbers and you did not live here, you would look at that and say, oh my God, those numbers are terrifying. That's a real problem. But when you are around it every single day, you almost get sort of numb to the magnitude
that's
of the
a really
risk.
fair analogy. Yeah, introducing this kind of new virus scares the hell out of people, but the one that we've known has been killing Americans for generations.
Right, because there's this element of, well, I had that once and I got better, and my cousin had that last week, and it really sucked, but they got better. But you're not thinking about or mentioning all the people who didn't. And so it's there's this element of you hear about it enough, you sort of become numb to the fact that this is a real risk and a real problem. But the new scary thing is, it's doesn't have that familiarity, and so it's a little more alarming. But if the average American tomorrow stands a much better chance of contracting / dying from flu than from coronavirus.
Well, what else do we need to know about either one of them? I'll let you go. It's late, and I appreciate you joining me. Is there anything else, Dr. May, that we need to know for Friday? Anything to watch for? Oh, I did see your tweet about the xenophobia and the fact that, people are treating people who are Chinese with tremendous, horrific racism. I saw that.
Absolutely.
You tweeted about that. So.
When we saw that in 2014 during the Ebola epidemic as well, where people who are from affected countries or even from countries near affected countries are, bullied and shunned. And
in the New York Times, they write the rapid spread of the coronavirus has unleashed a wave of panic and, in some cases, outright anti-Chinese sentiment across the globe. In Japan, the hashtag Chinese don't come to Japan has been trending on Twitter. In Singapore, tens of thousands of residents have signed a petition calling for the government to ban Chinese nationals from entering the country. In Hong Kong, South Korea, and Vietnam, businesses have posted signs saying that mainland Chinese customers are not welcome. It goes on and on in this article.
Absolutely. And our own Secretary of Commerce had such a lovely...
Yeah, I played that earlier. Played that earlier in the show. Oh, Wilbur Ross.
Oh, good Lord!
Yeah,
horrible. That's
not surprising.
It was. It was stunning, but not surprising. But
exactly, that's par for the course these days with his cabinet secretaries. They mimic his cruelty. Dr. Meghan May, thank you so much for joining me on short notice and give us an update, a real public service. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me again and keeping on talking about this.
Of course. All right. We'll talk to you again soon.
All right. Thanks.
Okay. That is it. 4 great guests. My special thanks to Cornell Woolridge, who helped me open the show. Of course, John Avlon of CNN. Then we talked to Will McCallum about how we can stop using plastic. And finally, Dr. Meghan May of the University of New England. Check them all out on Twitter. Buy their stuff. Get their things. Support them. Let them know that you heard them right here on Stand Up. 4 guests. How about that? A packed show, doing more and more of that whenever I can. I got the home studio. I got the ability to get these folks on, put it all together for you, and hell of a show. I learned a lot from talking to all of them. Hopefully you did as well. Got a lot of information. Maybe you were even entertained by it all. Thank you for your support. Support me on Patreon at patreon.com/Pete Dominic. This show cannot be sustained without your support on Patreon. Subscribe, give a rating, hit me up on Twitter at Pete Dominic, Instagram, Facebook, and all of it I'll be at Dangerfields and the Comic Strip in New York City Saturday night. And I'm headlining Levity Live, levitylive.com, Thursday, February 6th. Hope to see you at one of those dates if you're in and around the New York area and wherever you're at. Show me, tell me, bring me out to your location. Love to perform. Love to talk to you. Love to meet you. Thanks for listening. Talk to you on Monday.